As we transition from week 3 to week 4, or final week of this course, we are also going to make an important transition in our study and understanding of the US-China geopolitical contest. So far, we've been trying to understand why, in some ways, this contest was inevitable. Now, we're going to understand why this major contest remains avoidable. No geopolitical collision is unavoidable. This is the major lesson I learned after practicing diplomacy for 33 years in the Singapore Diplomatic Service. Indeed, I have seen major geopolitical adversaries make U-turns and walk away from contests, often bitter contests. Let me mention 2 examples. The first involves Vietnam and its ASEAN neighbors. After Vietnam's illegal invasion of Cambodia in December 1978, ASEAN condemned it. ASEAN led a global campaign in the UN to criticize this occupation. I played a small role as I was Singapore's ambassador to the UN from 1984 to 1989. Eventually, our campaign succeeded. Vietnam withdrew from Cambodia in 1989 and signed the Paris Peace Agreement in 1991. The adversarial relationship between ASEAN and Vietnam could have remained. Instead, both sides made U-turns and normalized relations. Quite amazingly, Vietnam later joined ASEAN in 1995. In contrast to the European Union's poor management of its relations with Russia after the end of the Cold War, ASEAN did a much better job. Similarly, China and Vietnam developed a bitter adversarial relationship after Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia. Indeed, both countries fought a major war in February 1979 with hundreds of thousands of soldiers involved. Yet, after Vietnam withdrew from Cambodia, both Vietnam and China made U-turns, and the China-Vietnam border, once among the most heavily mined and fortified borders in the world, became one of the most heavily traded borders in the world. By contrast, India and Pakistan, whose last major border war was in 1971, have still not normalized trade relations. In short, there are positive and negative examples of geopolitical adversaries overcoming bitter historical divisions. This is why, in the year 2020, when America and China are at a significant fork in the road in determining whether to proceed or avoid their geopolitical contests, they should be acutely aware that this contest can be avoided. In the next few video sessions, I will explain how it can be avoided. Yet, before leaving the case for the inevitability of the contest, let me highlight 3 key strategic mistakes that are driving the inevitability side of the equation. 2 of the mistakes are made by America, 1 is made by China. I'm highlighting them because it is theoretically possible for both sides to make U-turns away from their mistakes. The first strategic mistake made by America was to focus on primacy over people. The various American decision makers, many of whom remain anonymous in the deep state, who have decided to launch a geopolitical contest against China without first working out a strategy, have obviously decided that retaining America's #1 status as a global power is more important than improving the well-being of the American people. Hence, at a time when the average income of the bottom 50% of the American people has not improved over several decades, as documented earlier. Instead of cutting the US defense budget and transferring resources to help the poor in America who are truly suffering, America is doing the opposite. It is boosting the US defense budget. On 16 September 2020, the then US Defense Secretary announced an ambitious plan to expand the US Navy from 293 ships to more than 355 ships. The US Defense Secretary Mark Esper explained why. He said, quote, "I want to make clear that China cannot match the United States when it comes to naval power. We must stay ahead. We must retain our overmatch. And we will keep building modern ships to ensure that we remain the world's greatest navy," unquote. If George Kennan, the great American strategist, were alive today, he would heartily disapprove of this move. He would have recommended that America strengthen its society, not its navy, to win any geopolitical contest. The well-being of the American people is more important than the primacy of America in the world. Yet no American administration can make a U-turn away from increased defense spending. The second strategic mistake of America is to put ideology ahead of pragmatism. In justifying the increased negative moves against China, like closing down the Chinese consulate in Houston in July 2020, the US Secretary of State Pompeo declared that Communist China was the central threat of our times. Yet, as this course has documented, China is no longer exporting communism. In standing up to Communist China, Pompeo is standing up to a non-existent threat. America can live pragmatically at peace with a China that does not export communism. Instead of being pragmatic, America has decided to be ideological. This too is unwise. China too has made strategic mistakes. It has put pride ahead of pragmatism. Having published the 9-dash line of the South China Sea, China cannot walk away from it, even though if Deng Xiaoping were alive today, he would have pragmatically walked away from a 9-dash line that has become a strategic liability for China. Why is it a liability? Firstly, as documented by major international law scholars, it violates the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, that China has signed and ratified. Secondly, the 9-dash line has generated distrust and tension between China and its ASEAN neighbors. Thirdly, even though China has legitimate defense and naval interests in the South China Sea, these interests can be defended and protected without having a 9-dash line. Fourthly, as the world's largest trading power, it is not in China's larger national interests to create a 9-dash line precedent in the South China Sea that other powers might replicate in other regions. China's interests in open sea lanes globally are more important than its primacy in the South China Sea. Hence, there are solid reasons why China should make a clever U-turn away from the 9-dash line. However, pride will prevent China from being pragmatic. In short, mistakes made by both America and China have led to their geopolitical contests becoming inevitable. Yet, as we will document in the next few videos, this is also a geopolitical contest which is eminently avoidable.